Tuesday nights at Vorencis Rare Books carried a particular stillness. I could feel it the moment I unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped into the hushed darkness, the scent of aged leather and vanilla from centuries-old vellum wrapping around me like a familiar coat. The bookstore occupied a narrow Georgian townhouse in Boston's Beacon Hill, all original crown molding and creaking floorboards softened by Persian rugs and brass reading lamps that cast pools of golden light across mahogany shelves stretching toward impossibly high ceilings. The building had stood here since 1784, and sometimes I swore it remembered every reader who'd ever crossed its threshold. 8 months. That's how long I'd been working the overnight shift and pretending I belonged in a world where a single illuminated manuscript could be worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. 8 months of perfecting my invisibility, of becoming part of the careful machinery that preserved knowledge most of humanity had forgotten existed. The customers who browsed after midnight never really looked at the night clerk, not properly. We were functional, like the climate control system humming behind the walls or the archival gloves stacked beside the register. I preferred it that way. "You're writing in that journal again," Faye Kirilovna said, materializing from the biography section with her usual unnerving silence. Her silver hair was pinned in an elegant chignon despite the late hour, and she moved through the narrow aisles with the grace of someone who'd spent decades navigating these exact spaces. Faye had worked at Vorencis for 32 years and knew every volume by heart, every customer's particular obsessions, every book's precise location even in the darkness. "What journal?" I closed the leather-bound notebook quickly, my pen still warm between my fingers. "That one you carry everywhere. The one you think nobody notices." She smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of her pale blue eyes. Faye was one of those people who seemed to genuinely love her work, who found profound satisfaction in matching the right text to the right reader or discovering some forgotten treasure misfiled decades ago. I wasn't like that. For me, this was just survival with particularly beautiful scenery. "Cataloging notes," I said, already turning back to my actual work. My hands moved through familiar motions, checking the environmental sensors, adjusting the dehumidifiers, updating the acquisition log. But my mind wandered elsewhere. It usually did during these shifts. The repetition was meditative in its way, a rhythm I could lose myself in while my thoughts circled around more dangerous observations. Faye leaned against the circulation desk watching me work. "How are you settling into Boston? It's been almost a year since you arrived, hasn't it?" 8 months. I straightened a stack of appraisal requests, my accent still thick enough that the words came out careful, practiced. "Same as always." She made a soft sound of understanding that suggested she knew I was lying. Everyone at Vorencis seemed to understand that Veselina Vorontsova had arrived in America with secrets she had no intention of sharing. They were kind enough not to press. That was what I appreciated about this place. The respectful distance, the mutual understanding that some stories were better left unread. The bell above the door chimed softly, an original brass fixture from the 1780s that announced visitors with a sound like distant church bells. I looked up from my work, expecting one of our regular nocturnal scholars. Professor Hadley from BU perhaps coming to consult the medieval bestiaries. Or Reverend Okoye, who spent his insomniac nights reading Renaissance theology in the original Latin. Instead, Theron Vorencis stood in the doorway. He always arrived at precisely 1:47 a.m. on Tuesdays and Saturdays, a pattern I'd documented carefully in my journal over the past 8 months. Tonight he wore charcoal gray, a suit that looked hand-tailored in some European capital, perfectly cut across shoulders that suggested he actually used the fencing foils I'd seen mounted in his office. His dark hair was styled with the kind of casual precision that looked effortless but probably required significant maintenance. But it was his eyes that always caught my attention even from across the room. Dark and penetrating, the color of espresso in dim light, and they moved across the space with a cataloger's attention to detail, noticing everything, missing nothing, always scanning as though taking inventory of a domain he'd built across lifetimes. "Good evening, Mr. Vorencis," Faye said warmly, straightening with visible respect. "The Blackwood estate materials arrived this afternoon. I've placed them in the conservation room for your review." "Thank you, Faye." His voice was low, measured, with an accent I couldn't quite place. Sometimes I caught notes of Italian, other times something Slavic, occasionally something older that belonged to no modern language. And Miss Vorentsova. He turned those dark eyes on me and I felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. You're working late again. It's my shift, sir. I kept my voice professionally neutral, the way I'd learned to do. Midnight to 8 a.m. Tuesday through Saturday. Yes, of course. Something flickered across his expression. Amusement? Curiosity? Before he moved deeper into the shop, his footsteps soundless on the antique rugs. He walked the way apex predators moved through their territory. Confident, unhurried, aware of every detail in his environment. I'd written about it in my journal, trying to articulate what it was about Theron Vorencis that felt so fundamentally other. Faye watched him disappear into the stacks before turning back to me. He likes you, you know. He tolerates me. I pulled my journal back out, needing to record my observations while they were fresh. There's a difference. Theron doesn't tolerate people. He either ignores them completely or he pays attention. She collected her coat from behind the desk, preparing for her own departure. I would be alone for the next 6 hours. Just me and whatever customers drifted in from Boston's sleepless night. The fact that he speaks to you at all is noteworthy. After Faye left, I opened my journal to tonight's entry and continued writing. This had become my ritual over 8 months of overnight shifts, documenting the strange liminal world of Vorencis rare books after dark. The customers who browsed medieval grimoires at 3 a.m. The books that seemed to whisper when you passed certain shelves. The owner who moved through shadows like he'd been born in them. And especially the owner. I wrote, Tuesday 1:47 a.m. TV arrives exactly on schedule as always. He's wearing gray tonight, the color of winter storms over the Baltic. He straightens his cuffs before handling the blackwood materials, the same gesture he makes before touching anything printed before 1800. There's reverence in it and something else. Grief maybe. Like he's greeting old friends at a funeral. He knows what loss means. Real loss. The kind that compounds over lifetimes. Sometimes I watch him examining first editions and I see something in his face that I recognize from my own mirror. He knows what it means to be the last of something precious. To be the only one left who remembers. I paused, pen hovering over the page, and wondered, not for the first time, what exactly it was that Theron Vorencis was trying so desperately to preserve in this beautiful tomb of forgotten knowledge. And whether I really wanted to know the answer. The next hour passed in the comfortable silence I'd come to associate with the deepest part of night. A graduate student arrived around 2:30 a.m., requesting access to our collection of Ottoman cartography. I retrieved the materials from the climate-controlled vault, watching her white-gloved hands tremble slightly as she opened the first folio. That reverence never got old. The moment when someone encountered knowledge they'd only dreamed of touching. At 3:15 a.m., Theron emerged from the conservation room carrying a leather portfolio case that looked older than the building itself. He moved to the main counter where I was updating the digital catalog and I caught the scent of old paper and something else. Sandalwood, maybe, or myrrh. Something ancient and expensive. Miss Vorentsova. He set the portfolio down with careful precision. Your Russian is quite good. Educated Russian, not the modern vernacular. I looked up, startled. We'd never discussed my background beyond what my employment application required. My grandmother raised me. She was traditional. Staroverka. The word came out in a dialect I hadn't heard since childhood. Old Believer Russian, the formal ecclesiastical style that disappeared after the revolution. Vy govordi kak budto is drugogo veka. You speak as though from another century. My pen froze mid-word. No one in America spoke like that. No one under 100 years old spoke like that anywhere. How do you? I collect languages the way some people collect books. His smile was slight, knowing. They're both vessels for preserving what would otherwise be lost to time. He opened the portfolio, revealing an illuminated manuscript page protected by archival mylar. The gold leaf caught the lamplight and I recognized Cyrillic script from the 15th century, maybe earlier. This is from the Blackwood estate? I leaned closer despite myself. I didn't know they had Slavic materials. They didn't know either. It was misfiled in a collection of French psalters for 60 years. His finger traced the margin, not touching, just hovering, and something in his expression shifted. Became distant. Grieving. The monk who illuminated this died of plague before he could complete it. You can see where his hand stopped. Mid-letter. Mid-breath. I looked at the unfinished stroke and a chill ran through me. That's tragic. That's mortality. Theron closed the portfolio with careful finality. Everything human is a race against the clock. Even beauty. Especially beauty. He straightened, and the moment of vulnerability vanished behind professional courtesy. I'd like your opinion on the conservation approach. Your thesis work was on Slavic liturgical texts, yes. He'd read my graduate school thesis. The one I'd never finished because my entire family died and I'd fled Russia with nothing but a suitcase and survivor's guilt. I didn't complete my degree. That doesn't mean you're not qualified. He slid the portfolio toward me. Take your time. Document what you observe. After he returned to his office, I opened my journal and wrote furiously. He speaks Old Believer Russian. Perfectly. Not like someone who learned it academically, but like someone who lived it. And he knew about my thesis, work I never published, never mentioned. How much does he know about me? How much does he know about everything? At 4:47 a.m. the bell chimed again. I expected another insomniac scholar, but the woman who entered made the air itself feel different. Colder. More charged. She was perhaps 50, dressed in a black suit that screamed Milan or Paris, with dark hair swept into a severe twist. Her heels clicked against the hardwood with military precision, and her eyes, pale gray, almost colorless, swept the shop with the same cataloging attention Theron showed. She moved like him, I realized. With that same predatory grace. Davy Theron? She spoke without preamble, her Italian sharp and impatient. I understood enough to catch the meaning. Mr. Vorencis is in his office. Do you have an appointment? I don't need appointments. She was already moving past me, but Theron appeared at the top of the spiral staircase before she reached it. Irina. His voice was carefully neutral. It's late for social calls. This isn't social. Irina Svetlova. I recognized her now from the rare books auction catalogs. A dealer with an impeccable reputation and connections throughout Europe. We need to talk. Adesso. They disappeared into his office, but the door didn't close completely. I shouldn't have listened. Should have focused on my work, maintained the professional distance I'd perfected over 8 months. But something in Irina's urgency made my heart race, made my instincts, the ones that had kept me alive in Russia, scream warnings. I cordi si stanno muovendo di nuovo. The courts are moving again. Cashin ha aliati a Boston. Cashin has allies in Boston. Theron's response was too quiet to hear, but Irina's voice rose in frustration. You cannot keep hiding here among your books, pretending the world has forgotten what you are. I wrote in my journal with shaking hands. Who is Cashin? What courts? What is TV? At 5:30 a.m. Irina left without acknowledging me, her face a mask of controlled anger. Theron remained in his office. I could see his silhouette through the frosted glass, standing motionless at the window, looking out over Beacon Hill as dawn approached. The graduate student left at 6 a.m. By 6:30 we were alone, just me and Theron in a building full of the dead's preserved thoughts. I should have felt safe. This was my sanctuary, my refuge from a world that had taken everything. Instead, I felt like prey who'd finally noticed the predator's eyes in the darkness. At 7:45 a.m., I was shelving returns in the medieval history section when I heard it. Glass breaking. Multiple footsteps, too fast and too quiet to be human. My body reacted before my mind caught up. Pure instinct from 3 years of looking over my shoulder, of sleeping with a knife under my pillow, of knowing that violence could find you anywhere. I dropped into a crouch behind the stacks as voices filled the shop. Male. American. Speaking with the kind of casual authority that came from absolute confidence in their power. We know you have it, Vorencis. The Codex Nocturni. Don't make this difficult. I peered through a gap in the books and saw them. 5 men, dressed in expensive casual wear that somehow made them look more dangerous, not less. The one speaking was tall, blonde, beautiful in a way that felt wrong. Like a Renaissance painting of an angel before the fall. And then I saw Theron. He stood at the center of the main floor, utterly still, and something about him had changed. The careful facade of the bookstore owner had evaporated. What remained was something else entirely. Something that made my hindbrain scream run. Cassian. Theron's voice was different now. Colder. You're not welcome in my territory. Your territory? The blonde man laughed. The courts don't recognize archaic territorial claims. You know this. Give us the codex and we'll leave peacefully. No. What happened next occurred too fast for my human eyes to properly track. Cassian moved, but Theron moved faster. Impossibly fast, covering 15 feet in a heartbeat. There was a sound like meat hitting stone, and one of Cassian's men went flying into a bookshelf with force that should have killed him. But he got up. They all moved then, and I watched through the gaps in books as Theron fought 5 men with grace that looked choreographed. His eyes, I could see them now, burning crimson in the lamplight. His mouth, fangs, actual fangs, as he tore into one attacker's throat and drank. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Could only watch as the man I'd observed for 8 months, the melancholy bookstore owner who spoke dead languages and grieved over unfinished manuscripts, became something from nightmares. A vampire. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a whimper, something, because Theron's head snapped toward my hiding place. Our eyes met across the chaos, and I saw recognition in his blood-red gaze. Recognition and something that looked like devastation. I ran. Through the back corridor, past the conservation room, out the service entrance into an alley that smelled of garbage and rain. I ran until my lungs burned, until Boston's waking streets swallowed me, until I reached my apartment and locked every door and window with shaking hands. Only then did I realize what I'd left behind. My journal. Open on the circulation desk. Every observation I documented over 8 months. Every suspicion, every careful note about the man who was apparently a monster. And on the last page I'd written, still visible in my rushed handwriting. He knows what it means to be the last of something precious. I sat on the floor of my Alston apartment for 3 hours, back pressed against the door, watching dawn light creep across the second-hand furniture I'd accumulated over 8 months of carefully budgeted survival. My hands had finally stopped shaking, but my mind kept replaying what I'd witnessed in loops that grew more surreal with each repetition. Vampires. Real vampires. Not the romanticized creatures from the novels that lined my bookshelf, but something ancient and lethal moving through Boston's oldest streets. And I'd been working for one. Around 10 a.m., exhaustion finally overrode terror enough for rational thought to return. That's when I realized the full scope of my mistake. My journal. I lurched to my feet and dumped my messenger bag onto the kitchen table. Wallet. Keys. Phone. The archival gloves I'd forgotten to return. But no leather-bound journal. No 8 months of observations documenting everything strange about Vorencis Rare Books and its owner. Bouche moi, I whispered. My grandmother's prayer, automatic in crisis. I'd left it on the circulation desk. Where Theron would find it the moment the violence ended. Where he would read every entry I'd written about him. The detailed observations about his anachronistic knowledge, his grief over old books, his loneliness that mirrored my own. The speculation that had grown bolder over recent weeks as patterns became impossible to ignore. And worst of all, that last line. Written just hours ago before my world shattered. He knows what it means to be the last of something precious. I'd essentially documented his true nature without realizing it. Had seen through 8 centuries of careful camouflage with nothing but a night clerk's attention to detail and a writer's instinct for subtext. And now he knew that I knew. Or he would as soon as he read it. I grabbed my phone to call. Who? The police? And tell them what, exactly? That my employer was a vampire? That I'd witnessed an attempted robbery by other vampires? I'd be institutionalized before I finished the sentence. Faye. I could call Faye. Surely she'd worked there long enough to know the truth, to have seen something over 32 years. But when I pulled up her contact information, my finger hovered over the call button as doubt crept in. What if she was one of them too? What if the entire bookstore was some kind of vampire front organization? The paranoia that had kept me alive in Russia came flooding back. The certainty that nowhere was safe, that anyone could be compromised, that the only person you could truly trust was yourself. I started packing. One suitcase like before. Essentials only. I had maybe $3,000 saved, enough for a bus ticket to anywhere, enough to disappear again. I'd done it once, I could do it again. Except this time they had my journal. They had my full name from employment records, my address, my entire life documented in human resources files. And if what I'd witnessed was real, if vampires existed and moved through Boston with that kind of power, then running might not matter at all. I was pulling clothes from my closet when I saw him. A man standing on the sidewalk across from my building, utterly motionless despite the Tuesday morning foot traffic flowing around him like water around stone. He wore dark clothing and sunglasses even though the October sky was overcast, and something about his stillness felt wrong. Predatory. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Miss Vorentsova. Theron's voice, unmistakable even through the speaker. I need you to listen very carefully. Don't leave your apartment. Don't open your door for anyone. I'm coming to you now. You, my voice cracked. You're not coming near me. I saw what you are. What you did. You saw me defending my domain from Cashin Drever's clan. What you didn't see was me prevent them from following you. But I couldn't stop all of them. His tone carried an urgency I'd never heard before. There's someone watching your building. Probably more than one. You're in danger and I'm the only reason you're still alive. How did you get my number? Employee records. Veselina, please. I know you're frightened. I know what you witnessed violates everything you thought you understood about the world. But if Cashin's people reach you before I do, they'll kill you for what you saw. And unlike me, they won't hesitate. The line went dead. I looked out the window again. The man hadn't moved. Another figure appeared at the corner. A woman in business attire, also motionless, also watching my building with inhuman focus. I backed away from the window, heart hammering. 4th floor apartment. Fire escape accessible from the bedroom. I could climb down, disappear into Alston's maze of student housing and side streets. I'd done harder things. Survived worse situations. The temperature in my apartment dropped 10 degrees in a heartbeat. I spun around and Theron Vorencis stood in my kitchen. Not at the door, he was simply there as though he'd materialized from shadow itself. He wore different clothes than before and there was no blood on him, no evidence of the violence I'd witnessed. Just the same measured composure I'd observed for 8 months, now revealed as the mask it always was. How? I grabbed a kitchen knife from the block, the blade shaking in my grip. I locked the door. You can't. Locks are for humans. He raised both hands slowly, showing empty palms. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to explain. To protect you if you'll let me. Protect me from what? From you. From your kind. From Cashin. Theron took a single step closer, moving with that same predatory grace. He's the 3rd eldest vampire in North America. He wants something I possess. Information about my bloodline that could destroy what's left of us. You witnessed his attack. You saw me for what I am. That knowledge makes you a liability to him and a loose end he'll want eliminated. I kept the knife raised, though we both knew it was useless. What are you? Archaic vampire. One of the oldest bloodlines, nearly extinct now. The courts, vampire governance, spent 3 centuries hunting us because we possess abilities modern vampires fear. He pulled my journal from his coat pocket, handling it with the same reverence he showed ancient manuscripts. You wrote that I know what it means to be the last of something precious. You were right. I want my journal back. I read it. His dark eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw genuine vulnerability there. Every entry. 8 months of observations that saw through defenses I've maintained for lifetimes. You noticed things about me that vampires I've known for decades never questioned. You understood loneliness I thought I'd buried centuries ago. Give it back. My voice broke. He set it on the counter between us, sliding it forward with careful fingers. Your entry about my reaction to the unfinished manuscript. The monk who died mid-letter. You wrote that I grieved as though I'd known him personally. Theron's expression became distant. I did know him. Brother Mikhail. I was passing through Novgorod when the plague came. He begged me to save him, to make him like me so he could finish his life's work. I refused. I've watched too many monks, too many artists, too many brilliant minds die because I believed mortality was sacred. By the time I returned to offer him the choice, he was already gone. I lowered the knife slightly. That was when? 1486. The number hung in the air between us, impossible and absolute. You're over 500 years old. 837. He said it matter-of-factly, the way someone might mention their street address. I was born in 1188 in what's now Romania. Transformed in 1215. I've been the last of my direct bloodline for 312 years. I picked up my journal, holding it against my chest like armor. Why are you telling me this? Because Cashin will use your ignorance against you. Because you deserve to understand the danger you're in. And because... He paused, something almost human flickering across his features. Because you saw me. Really saw me. Not the monster I became tonight, but the person I've been trying to preserve beneath 8 centuries of survival. That's rare enough to be worth protecting. The Codex. I remembered Cashin's demand. What is it? A registry of surviving archaic vampires. 7 families hidden across the world. If Cashin deciphers it, he can hunt them all down. Seize their territories, their resources, their accumulated power. He's been systematically eliminating my kind for decades, and your journal entry identifying me as archaic gives him one more piece of evidence to bring before the courts. The implications crashed over me. So I'm not just a witness to vampire violence. I'm documentation of what you are. Yes. No pretense, no softening. Cashin will want you dead or turned. The courts will want your memory modified. And Theron took another step closer, his voice dropping. I won't let them erase you for stumbling onto truth you shouldn't have found. You've already survived one massacre. I won't let you endure another. The word froze me. What do you know about that? Your family's death in Russia 3 years ago wasn't a gas explosion. The timing, the thoroughness. It bore hallmarks of supernatural intervention. I have contacts throughout Europe. I've been investigating since you mentioned Russia, trying to understand what you were running from. His jaw tightened. I should have told you sooner. Should have warned you. But I thought I could protect you through ignorance. You knew. Rage and grief surged through me in equal measure. You knew my family was murdered and you said nothing? What could I have said without revealing what I am? Without making you a target all over again? He spread his hands. I was trying to spare you this choice. What choice? Run back to Russia and hope Cashin doesn't follow. Let the courts modify your memory and lose everything that makes you who you are. Or, his eyes held mine. Trust me. Let me protect you while we stop Cashin together. You'll enter a world you didn't know existed, face dangers you can't fully comprehend yet. But you'll be alive. Where? Yourself. I looked at my half-packed suitcase, at the journal that had betrayed me, at the vampire standing in my kitchen offering impossible choices. 3 years ago I'd fled Russia with nothing but survivor's instinct and desperate hope. I'd rebuilt a small, careful life in Boston. Stayed invisible. Stayed safe. And I'd been miserable. Lonely. Going through motions of existence without ever really living. If I stay, I said slowly, if I trust you, what then? Then we face the court of shadows together. Prove Cashin's real intentions. Protect the other archaic families before he finds them. Theron's voice softened. And you help me not be the last anymore. I clutched my journal tighter, feeling the weight of 8 months of observations, of careful documentation of a life I'd tried to understand from safe distance. Maybe that had always been my mistake. Thinking that observation was enough, that I could understand the world without risking participation in it. Those people watching my building. How many? 4. I can get you past them. To where? Somewhere safe. Somewhere Cashin can't reach. He held out his hand. But we need to leave now. I looked at that outstretched hand, pale, steady, belonging to a creature who'd lived through 8 centuries of loss and somehow still chose to protect one frightened Russian girl who'd seen too much. I need my laptop. And that photograph. I pointed to the framed picture of my family, the only one I'd salvaged from the fire. 30 seconds, Theron said. I grabbed both, shoved them in my messenger bag alongside my journal. When I turned back, he was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I won't let them erase you, he said again. I promise you that. I took his hand. His skin was cool but not cold, solid and real despite everything impossible about him. If you're lying to me, then you have excellent reason to stake me through the heart. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. I believe you'll find the supplies in the conservation room. 3rd cabinet behind the archival boxes. Despite everything, the terror, the impossible revelations, the danger waiting outside, I almost laughed. Then the window exploded inward in a shower of glass and we were both moving. Theron moved faster than my eyes could track, pulling me away from the window as 2 figures crashed through the shattered glass. I caught a glimpse of inhuman faces, eyes reflecting light like animals. Before we were somehow in the hallway, then the stairwell, descending 4 flights in what felt like seconds but couldn't have been. A black car idled at the curb, engine running. Theron pushed me into the back seat and we were moving before I'd even registered sitting down. The driver, a compact man with silver threading through dark hair, didn't speak, just navigated through Alston's morning traffic with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this before. That's the 4th time this month, the driver said in accented English. Romanian, I thought. Cashin's getting bolder. He knows the court is watching. He's forcing my hand. Theron sat beside me, utterly still in a way humans never managed. Thank you, Andre. Into Donna. Boys. I pressed against the door trying to process what had just happened. Vampires had broken into my apartment in daylight. Or near daylight. It was overcast, I reminded myself. Maybe that mattered. Everything I thought I knew about the world had shattered in the span of 12 hours, and I was rebuilding understanding from fragments and folklore. Where are we going? My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Salem. I have a house there. Theron was watching me with that cataloging attention. Are you hurt? No. I looked down at my hands, surprised to find them unmarked. You moved so fast. One of many advantages Cashin wants for himself. He pulled out his phone, typing something rapidly. Irina is meeting us there. She'll want to argue about bringing you, but you're safer with me than anywhere else right now. The drive took 40 minutes through morning traffic. I watched Boston give way to smaller towns, then to Salem's historic streets lined with houses that remembered witch trials and maritime fortunes. Andre turned onto a private road that wound through old-growth trees, and suddenly we were pulling up to a house that made my breath catch. Mansion felt inadequate. The building rose 3 stories in Gothic Revival style, all steep gables and pointed arches, built from dark stone that seemed to absorb the gray morning light. Ivy climbed the walls in careful patterns and the windows, dozens of them, reflected clouds like closed eyes. You live here. I climbed out slowly, staring up at the facade. Since 1847. I had it built after the bookstore became established. Theron moved to the front door, which opened before he touched it. Welcome to the only place Cashin can't reach without declaring open war. The interior matched the exterior's promise. We entered through a vestibule into a grand hall with a staircase that curved upward like a question mark. Every surface held treasures. Renaissance paintings, medieval tapestries, furniture that belonged in museums. But it was the smell that struck me most. Old paper and leather, the same scent that perfumed Vorencis rare books. Your library. I followed Theron through an archway into a room that made my heart ache with longing. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, rolling ladders, reading tables positioned beneath windows that would flood the space with light on sunny days. Thousands of volumes, tens of thousands in languages I recognized and many I didn't. My real collection. He watched my reaction with something that might have been pleasure. The bookstore holds what I'm willing to sell. These I keep, I moved toward the nearest shelf, reading spines. Greek, Latin. Cyrillic scripts I'd only seen in museum exhibitions. Some of these shouldn't exist outside of universities. Some shouldn't exist at all. They're the only surviving copies. He pulled a volume bound in cracked leather, handling it with familiar reverence. 15th century alchemical treatise. The Inquisition burned every other copy. I saved this one from a fire in Prague. When? 1467. The casual mention of a year I'd only encountered in history books made reality tilt again. This was my life now, standing in a vampire's library discussing books older than countries, processing the impossible as though it were merely improbable. The front door opened with force and Irina Svetlova strode in radiating fury. She took in the scene, Theron me my presence in his sanctuary, and her expression hardened. Say impazzito? Are you insane? Otto Sekli, 800 years you've survived by avoiding exactly this kind of attachment. Now you risk everything for a mortal who stumbled onto truth she has no business knowing. She didn't stumble. She observed. There's a difference. Theron set the book down carefully. And she's under my protection now. Your protection? Irina's pale eyes fixed on me with open hostility. She's a liability. A witness. Every hour she breathes is another hour Cashin can use her against you before the courts. Which is why she stays here. Where Cashin can't reach her. And when the courts summon you. When they demand accounting for exposing our nature to a human. What then? Irina moved closer to me and I fought the instinct to retreat. You'll testify, girl? Speak before 12 elders who've forgotten more about cruelty than you'll ever learn? Convince them your life is worth the risk to our secrecy? Irina. Theron's voice carried warning. Enough. No. Not enough. Not nearly. But she stepped back, jaw tight with frustration. I've stood beside you for 3 centuries. Watched you endure losses that would have destroyed weaker vampires. You've survived by staying detached, by never caring enough about mortals to compromise your judgment. And now this, she gestured at me. This slip of a girl who writes in journals and sees too much threatens everything we've built. She sees what others miss. That's precisely why she matters. Their argument continued in rapid Italian, too fast for my limited understanding. I stood there clutching my messenger bag, feeling every bit the liability Irina claimed I was. He was right objectively. I had stumbled into knowledge that endangered their entire world. My continued existence was a risk. But I was so tired of running. Of being the frightened survivor, the last one left, the girl who'd lost everything and rebuilt nothing. When they finally paused, I spoke in Russian, the formal dialect Theron had used. Yaponimeu opasnost, that. I understand the danger. But I also understand what it means to be the last of something. To carry memories no one else shares. He wrote about me in that journal that I'm the last who remembers my family's laughter. He's the last who remembers. I looked at Theron. How many people? How many languages and songs and ways of life? Something shifted in Irina's expression. Not warmth exactly, but a flicker of recognition. Come, Theron said quietly. There's something you need to see. He led me deeper into the library to a table where a book lay open under protective glass. The pages were vellum, the text illuminated with gold that still gleamed after centuries. But it wasn't the artistry that made my breath catch. It was the content. Names. Hundreds of names written in careful columns. Beside each name, locations, dates, family lineages traced back generations. The Codex Nocturni. Theron's voice was soft. Registry of archaic vampire bloodlines. 7 families survived the purges. 7 families hiding across the world, preserving what remains of our kind. His finger hovered over one entry. The Dragomir line in Romania. 3 members. The youngest is only 40 years turned. A child by our standards. If Cashin finds them, they die. I scanned the page, seeing Russian names among the others. The Fokhov family. Petersburg. A scholar and her partner. They maintain a private archive of pre-Christian Slavic traditions. Knowledge that would be lost if they were eliminated. He turned the page, showing more names, more locations. This is what Cashin wants. Not just power or territory. He wants to erase us completely. Rewrite vampire history with archaic bloodlines reduced to cautionary tales. Why? I looked up at him. Why does he hate you so much? Because we remember what vampires were before the courts, before the careful politics and territories. We remember when we were gods in human eyes, when we shaped civilizations rather than hiding within them. Theron's expression grew distant. Cashin believes that memory makes us dangerous. He's probably right. I thought about my family, about the stories my grandmother told of old believers persecuted for remembering the wrong version of faith. How authorities always feared those who carried inconvenient truths. You're like my people. The ones who wouldn't forget. Yes. His eyes met mine and I saw the loneliness I'd documented in my journal laid bare. Exactly like that. A knock at the library door interrupted the moment. Andre entered, carrying a cream envelope sealed with red wax. The silence that fell was absolute. Theron took the envelope and I watched his jaw tighten as he read the contents. The Court of Shadows convenes in 3 days. I'm summoned to answer charges of endangering the masquerade through mortal exposure. He looked at me. They know about you. How? Cashin filed the complaint within hours of the attack. He's forcing the issue, making the courts choose between sanctioning me or appearing weak. Theron set the letter down carefully. I have to appear. Have to answer for my actions. Then I'm coming with you. The words were out before I'd fully thought them through. I'm the witness. I should testify. Absolutely not, Irina said immediately. You'd be walking into a room with 12 vampires who consider humans cattle at best. They'll tear your testimony apart and possibly you along with it. She's right, Theron said, but I heard reluctance in his voice. The courts are dangerous even for vampires. For a human. I've faced dangerous men before. I thought of Russia, of the weeks after my family died when I'd gathered evidence alone, knowing one wrong move would mean joining them. I can do this. And your case is stronger with human testimony proving you've lived peacefully among us. Or it gives them more reason to eliminate you as a loose end. But Theron was considering it. I could see the calculation in his eyes. I won't hide while others make decisions about my life. I won't be erased. I pulled out my journal, holding it up. I saw you. Really saw you. If that testimony can save the families in this book, then I'm giving it. Whether you want me to or not. Irina looked at Theron with something between exasperation and grudging respect. She's as stubborn as you are. Dociiut. Over the next 2 days they prepared me. Irina taught me court protocol. How to address the elders, how to speak without giving offense, how to recognize the political currents beneath every question. Theron shared histories I'd never find in human books, explaining the ancient feuds and alliances that would shape my reception. And in the quiet hours between lessons, I explored his library and read my journal entries back to him, watching his reactions to my observations. You wrote that I handled old books like saying goodbye, he said once. That's exactly what it is. Every text I preserve outlives another person I knew. Eventually I'll be the only one left who remembers the author was funny, or kind, or terrified they'd be forgotten. Then we write it down, I said. Make them permanent in ink. It's not the same as memory, but it's something. Yes, he agreed quietly. It's something. On the third morning as we prepared to leave for the court, I asked the question that had been circling my thoughts. Why are you doing this? Risking so much for someone you barely know. Theron was adjusting his cufflinks, a habitual gesture I'd noted dozens of times in my journal. Because 800 years is too long to be alone. Because you saw me as a person before you knew I was a monster. And because he met my eyes. Because I'm tired of being the last. I want to be first for once. First person you trust. First one you turn to. I want to matter to someone who actually has a choice whether to let me. Before I could respond, Andre appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. We have a problem. Veselina's apartment was broken into again last night. They took everything. Documents, photographs, her employment records from the bookstore. My heart sank. My grandmother's photograph. More than that. Theron's voice hardened. They have everything they need to build a case that you're my accomplice, not my victim. That you've been collaborating with an archaic vampire for months. But my journal proves otherwise. The entries show I didn't know what you were. The journal is your word against Cashin's evidence. The courts will believe whichever narrative serves their interests. He moved to the window looking out over the grounds. We need those documents back. Need to prove the timeline of your discovery. I could go back, I suggested. My landlord has copies of my lease, my application. He might have. No. Both Theron and Irina spoke simultaneously. It's obviously a trap, Irina continued. Cashin wants to isolate you from protection, get you alone where he can. She stopped, but the implication was clear. I can go with her, Andrei offered. Keep her safe while she retrieves what she needs. Theron was silent for a long moment, weighing risks. Finally, 2 hours. In and out. Veselina stays in your sight at all times. An hour later, I stood outside my landlord's office in Alston with Andrei at my side, trying to ignore the crawling sensation of being watched. Herbert Morrison was a retired professor who managed his small building with academic precision, and he agreed immediately to print copies of my rental documents. Take a seat, dear. The printer is temperamental. He disappeared into his back office, and I perched on the edge of a worn chair, counting seconds. Andrei stood by the window, body tense. Something's wrong. What? It's too quiet. Too empty. His hand moved to his jacket, where I now knew he carried a weapon. We should leave. Now. The back door burst open and they poured in, 4 vampires moving with that impossible speed. Andrei fought viciously, taking down one before being overwhelmed. I ran for the front exit, but a woman appeared there, blocking my escape with a smile that showed fangs. Hello, little journal writer. Cashin has been so eager to meet you. The last thing I saw before something hit my head was Andrei's furious face as they dragged him back, wounded but alive. Then darkness swallowed everything. I woke in a penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor, wrists bound to a chair, head throbbing. Cashin Drever sat across from me, beautiful and terrifying in the afternoon light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Let's talk about your employer, he said pleasantly. And about what really happened the night your family died in Russia. Cashin's penthouse was all glass and steel, modern in a way that felt deliberately opposite to Theron's gothic sensibilities. He poured himself wine, red of course, and settled into a chair across from me with the casual confidence of someone who'd already won. Your family, he began, swirling the glass. Dmitri and Svetlana Vorontsov. Your grandmother Galina. Your younger brother Pavel. All dead in a fire authorities called accidental, but you never believed that, did you? My throat closed. I hadn't heard their names spoken aloud in 3 years. My associates in Moscow handled it. Your father was investigating financial irregularities at his bank. Money laundering for vampire enterprises throughout Eastern Europe. He was getting too close to our operations, asking questions that would have exposed networks we'd spent decades building. Cashin took a sip of wine. It was business. Nothing personal. You murdered my entire family for business? The words came out strangled. I protected vampire interests. That's my role in the courts. I handle problems that threaten our secrecy. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming. But here's what your beloved Theron hasn't told you. He knew. Has known for months. He has contacts throughout Europe, intelligence networks that span continents. The moment you mentioned Russia, he investigated your background and found my operation's fingerprints all over your family's death. The room tilted. No. Yes. And he said nothing. Kept you working in his bookstore, let you write your little observations, all while knowing I killed everyone you loved. Cashin's smile was cruel. So tell me, Veselina Vorontsova, who's the real monster? The vampire who does what's necessary to protect his kind? Or the one who befriends you while hiding the truth about your family's murder? I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think past the roaring in my ears. Theron had known. All those careful conversations, those moments of shared loneliness, the way he'd looked at me when I spoke about being the last, he'd known the entire time who'd made me last. Yow. Cashin set down his wine glass. I'm going to offer Theron a trade. You for the Codex Nocturni and his surrender to court judgment. He'll accept because underneath 8 centuries of careful control, he's sentimental about mortals he decides matter. And when he arrives, his smile widened. Well, the courts will finally see what archaic vampires really are. Dangerous relics who value individual humans over collective security. He won't come. He will. Because I'm going to send him proof I have you. And because he's already in love with you, which makes him predictably stupid. Cashin pulled out his phone, typing something. My people are already delivering my terms. We'll see how quickly he breaks. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. Cashin kept me bound but unharmed, occasionally sharing details about his plans with the casual cruelty of someone who believed I'd be dead or memory wiped soon enough. He showed me documents proving his systematic elimination of archaic vampires over decades. Estates seized, fortunes absorbed, ancient bloodlines reduced to footnotes. Theron's the last significant archaic in North America, he explained. Once I have the codex, I can eliminate the others quietly. The courts will thank me for removing unstable elements. And Boston, this beautiful historic city perfect for our kind, becomes mine. Near midnight his phone buzzed. Cashin read the message and smiled. He's agreed. The exchange happens at the court session tomorrow night. How romantic, he's willing to face execution for you. They moved me as dawn approached, transporting me in a windowless van to somewhere underground. When the blindfold came off, I found myself in a chamber that defied modern architecture. All stone and shadow, lit by torches that cast dancing flames across walls carved with symbols I didn't recognize. The Court of Shadows. 12 chairs formed a semicircle on a raised dais, each occupied by a vampire whose age showed in their absolute stillness. These weren't like the ones who'd attacked Theron's bookstore. These were ancient, powerful, their very presence making the air feel heavier. An elder with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice spoke first. The court acknowledges Cashin Drever, who brings charges against Theron Vorencis of the archaic line. State your accusation. Endangering the masquerade through mortal exposure. Cashin gestured to me. This human witnessed vampire violence and was kept alive out of sentiment rather than eliminated as protocol demands. She possesses detailed knowledge of our existence, our nature, our internal conflicts. Theron Vorencis has compromised centuries of secrecy for one insignificant mortal. Another elder, a woman whose dark skin was marked with scarification patterns, leaned forward. And the accused? Where is Theron Vorencis? The main doors opened and Theron entered. He looked exactly as I'd always seen him, composed, careful, unmistakably dangerous beneath the civilized exterior. But his eyes found mine immediately and I saw devastation there. I am here to answer the charges. His voice carried through the chamber with quiet authority. You admit to keeping a mortal witness alive despite her knowledge of our kind? The silver-haired elder's tone was neutral. I do. You acknowledge this violates every protocol established to protect vampire secrecy? I acknowledge the protocols. I don't acknowledge they apply in this circumstance. Murmurs rippled through the assembled vampires. Cashin's smile was triumphant. The human will testify, the scarified elder declared. Bring her forward. They untied me and I walked to the center of the chamber on shaking legs. 12 pairs of ancient eyes tracked my movement, and I felt the weight of their attention like physical pressure. State your name, the silver-haired elder commanded. Veselina Nikolaevna Vorentsova. You witnessed vampire violence at Vorencis Rare Books on the morning of October 15th? Yes. My voice was steadier than I felt. I witnessed Cashin Drever and 4 others attack the bookstore demanding something called the Codex Nocturni. I witnessed Theron defend his property using methods I now understand were vampiric in nature. And Theron Vorencis kept you alive afterward, knowing you'd seen our true nature? He protected me from those who would have killed me for that knowledge. Yes. Cashin stepped forward. The court should note that this human worked for Theron for 8 months prior to the incident. During that time she documented observations suggesting she suspected his true nature. He produced papers, copies of my journal entries. This isn't accidental exposure. This is grooming. Cultivating a mortal witness who could testify favorably when his actions were inevitably questioned. That's not true. I pulled my actual journal from where they'd let me keep it. These entries prove I didn't understand what Theron was until I witnessed the attack. 8 months of observations, yes. But observations of someone I thought was human. Someone lonely and grieving who reminded me of myself. I documented his kindness, his preservation of human knowledge, his careful distance from attachment that suggested tragedy rather than monstrosity. I opened the journal, reading passages aloud. The entry about the unfinished manuscript and the monk who died mid-letter. My speculation about Theron being the last of something precious. The observation that he guarded knowledge like someone who'd lost too much. This is the testimony of someone who saw a person, not a predator. Someone who recognized shared loneliness across a divide I didn't know existed. I looked directly at the 12 elders. If keeping me alive endangered your secrecy, it's only because Cashin chose violence in a place where I worked. Theron defended himself. I witnessed it. Everything after was him protecting a bystander from becoming collateral damage in vampire politics I still barely understand. The scarified elder studied me with unnerving intensity. You claim Theron Vorencis is not a threat to the masquerade? I claim he's lived peacefully among humans for centuries, preserving their knowledge and culture rather than exploiting or destroying them. If that's threatening to you, perhaps the threat is what it reveals about your own choices. The chamber erupted in voices, some angry, some intrigued. The silver-haired elder raised a hand for silence. Then Irina Svetlova entered and the energy shifted entirely. She carried a leather portfolio that she presented to the court with a formal bow. Evidence of Cashin Drever's unauthorized operations. Financial records showing systematic seizure of archaic vampire estates over 3 decades. Witness testimony from survivors of attacks he attributed to human violence. And she opened the portfolio. Documentation that the assault on Vorencis rare books was not about the codex. It was about eliminating the last archaic vampire in Boston so Cashin could claim the territory. Cashin's composure cracked. Those records are fabricated. They're from your own accounts. Irina's voice was cold. Seized by operatives I've had embedded in your organization for 6 years. You've been hunting archaic vampires not to protect the masquerade, but to steal their accumulated wealth and territories. Theron was your next target. The human, she gestured to me, was just convenient excuse to act before the courts questioned your pattern of expansion. The elders spoke among themselves in languages I didn't know. Cashin's face was a mask of controlled fury, but I saw calculation beneath it. He was looking for escape routes, for ways to salvage this. This court has heard sufficient testimony, the silver-haired elder finally announced. The human's knowledge presents risk, acknowledged. But Cashin Drever's unauthorized elimination of archaic bloodlines presents greater threat to our social order. No individual vampire may conduct campaigns of extermination without court sanction. She knows our secrets. Cashin's control was fraying. You'd let her walk free because of some fabricated financial records? The records are authentic, the scarified elder said. We've verified them independently while you were presenting your case. In a blur of motion Cashin moved, not toward the elders but toward me. He was fast but Theron was faster. They collided between me and the dais, and suddenly I was watching 800 years of archaic power unleashed. Theron moved like violence made graceful, disarming Cashin and pinning him against the floor with one hand wrapped around his throat. His eyes burned crimson, fangs fully extended, and he was the predator I'd witnessed in the bookstore multiplied tenfold. You killed her family. Theron's voice was unrecognizable. Destroyed them to protect operations I would have dismantled if I'd known. You created her pain. Made her run. Made her last. Cashin struggled futilely. So kill me. Prove the court's right about archaic savagery. Theron's hand tightened and I saw murder in his eyes. Saw 8 centuries of loss and loneliness crystallizing into this one moment of possible revenge. Don't. The word came out before I'd consciously decided to speak. Theron's eyes found mine, still crimson, still inhuman, and I held his gaze. Don't prove him right about what you are. You told me archaic vampires remember what you were before the courts. That you shaped civilizations rather than hiding in them. Be that. Be what you told me you were, someone who preserves rather than destroys. I took a step closer, ignoring every survival instinct screaming at me to run. Be first. Not last. First to show restraint when everyone expects violence. First to choose something better. The chamber was absolutely silent. Theron stared at me and slowly, so slowly, the crimson faded from his eyes. His hand loosened on Cashin's throat. When he stood, leaving Cashin gasping on the floor, he looked exhausted in a way that transcended physical tiredness. Take him, Theron said to the court. Judge him according to your laws. I won't be executioner tonight. The silver-haired elder nodded with something that might have been approval. Cashin Drever is stripped of territory and status. He is exiled from North American courts for unauthorized elimination of vampire bloodlines. As for Theron Vorencis, the elder looked at me. Your restraint is noted. You may retain your territories under court observation. The human. Veselina, I said quietly. My name is Veselina. Veselina Vorentsova is offered choice. Memory modification and return to human ignorance, with financial compensation for troubles endured. Or, the elder's gaze was penetrating. Entry into vampire society under Theron Vorencis's protection, with full knowledge of what that entails. Choose now. I looked at Theron, who stood silent, letting me make this choice without influence. Then at my journal clutched in my hands. 8 months of observations. 3 years of running. A lifetime of being the last. I choose to remember, I said. I choose to stay. The court dispersed with the formal efficiency of ancient bureaucracy. Cashin was escorted away by enforcers whose faces showed no emotion, his protests fading into the stone corridors beneath Boston's oldest streets. The elders departed without ceremony, and suddenly the chamber that had held the weight of centuries emptied into echoing silence. Theron stood near the dais where he'd nearly killed a man. I remained where the court had left me, my journal still clutched against my chest like armor that had already failed. Veselina. He took a step toward me and I held up my hand. You knew. My voice shook. You knew Cashin killed my family and you said nothing. For months. While I wrote about you in my journal, while I trusted you, the words caught in my throat. You let me believe they died for nothing. That it was just random violence, just bad luck that took everyone I loved. I couldn't tell you without exposing what I am. Without making you a target all over again. Theron's composure was fracturing, 8 centuries of control cracking. By the time I gathered enough evidence to prove Cashin's involvement, you'd already witnessed the attack. Already knew the truth about vampires. And then every minute was about keeping you alive, not being honest with me? I took a step closer, fury overwhelming fear. You could have told me in Salem. In your library when I shared my story about being the last. You could have said, I know who killed them. Given me that much. But you kept your secrets and let me keep believing my family's deaths were meaningless. They weren't meaningless. Your father was trying to expose corruption, trying to protect others. He was brave and your mother was brilliant, and Pavel. Theron's voice broke. Pavel was 8 years old and learned piano and wanted to be a veterinarian. I know because I read every file I could find. I know their names, their lives, their loss. And it's destroying me that I can't give them back to you. The specific details, piano, veterinarian, things I'd never mentioned, hit like physical blows. You investigated them. I investigated everything. The moment you mentioned Russia, I needed to know what you were running from. Needed to know if danger would follow you to Boston, if I needed to protect you from. He stopped. From exactly what happened. From Cashin using you against me. So this was all strategy? Keeping me close so you could monitor threats? No. The word was vehement. It started that way maybe. professional concern for an employee caught in circumstances beyond her control. But then I read your journal and everything changed. I remembered the morning after the attack, Theron appearing in my apartment with my journal, his expression when he'd quoted my observations back at me. Changed how? I fell in love with you through your journal before I admitted it to myself. Theron moved closer, his careful distance finally abandoned. You saw me, not the vampire, not the bookstore owner, but the person buried under 8 centuries of loneliness. You wrote about my grief over unfinished manuscripts, about how I guarded knowledge like someone who'd lost too much. You understood what it meant to be the last of something precious. And when I read that line, his voice roughened. When I read that you recognized me, saw through every defense I'd built, I realized I wasn't ready to be the last anymore. What does that mean? It means I wanted to be first. First person you thought of when you were happy or afraid. First one you turned to, first one you trusted. I wanted to matter to someone who actually had a choice whether to let me. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough for me to see the devastation in his dark eyes. And I destroyed that chance by keeping secrets I thought were protecting you. By choosing your safety over your agency. I was wrong. I'm sorry. And if you want to take the memory modification, if you want to forget vampires and me and everything that's happened, I'll understand. I looked at my journal at 8 months of observations documenting a loneliness that mirrored my own. At the last entry I'd written before everything shattered. He knows what it means to be the last of something precious. I fled Russia because everyone I loved was taken from me in one night, I said slowly. I spent 3 years too afraid to care about anyone again. Too afraid to let anyone close enough to become another person I could lose. And now you're asking me to risk that pain multiplied across decades. To watch you endure while I age and weaken and eventually die. To love someone who'll remember my face for centuries after I'm gone. That's terrifying. Theron's expression closed, bracing for rejection. But you know what's more terrifying? I continued. Spending whatever life I have left too afraid to live it. Running from connection because it might end in loss. Being the last of my family and never building anything new because I'm paralyzed by grief. I met his eyes. Maybe love is being willing to carry someone even when it costs everything. Maybe that's what makes us permanent. Not living forever but mattering enough to be remembered. Veselina. I'm furious with you. I closed the distance between us. Furious that you kept the truth about my family. Furious that you made choices about my life without asking me. We're going to fight about that. Probably multiple times. But I'm also choosing to stay. To be your equal partner in whatever comes next. Not your mortal pet, not your liability, your partner. His hands came up slowly, giving me time to pull away, before cupping my face with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone who'd nearly killed a man an hour ago. I don't deserve this. Don't deserve you. Probably not. I managed something close to a smile. But 8 centuries alone seems like sufficient punishment. Maybe it's time you tried something different. He kissed me then and it was nothing like I'd imagined. Cool lips, careful pressure, the taste of something ancient and other. But beneath the strangeness was longing so profound it made my chest ache. 800 years of isolation condensed into one moment of connection. When we finally pulled apart, Irina was standing in the chamber's entrance, her expression unreadable. The court has assigned watchers, she said without preamble. They'll monitor Theron's activities, ensure he maintains protocols regarding human interaction. You, she focused on me, are now officially registered as under his protection. Which means every vampire in Boston will know your face and your status. Some will respect it. Others will see you as potential leverage. Then I need to learn how to protect myself. I straightened, forcing confidence I didn't fully feel. Irina studied me for a long moment. You fought for him when I would have counseled retreat. Stood before 12 elders and spoke truth when lying would have been safer. That's not weakness. She moved closer and I saw grudging respect in her pale eyes. That's the kind of loyalty our kind lost somewhere in our centuries of careful politics. If you're truly staying, I'll teach you to survive this world. Vampire history, combat, protocols that keep humans alive in our territory. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing is. Her mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. I see why he loves you. You're both insufferably stubborn. The weeks that followed were the strangest of my life. Vorencis Rare Books reopened with new security measures invisible to human customers but obvious to vampire ones. I returned to my night shift, but everything had changed. Now I understood what I was guarding, recognized which customers were human scholars and which were undead collectors pursuing centuries-long interests. Theron taught me vampire history in his Salem library, tracing political currents that span generations. Irina trained me in self-defense techniques that assumed your opponent had supernatural speed and strength. Andre, recovered from his wounds, showed me how to identify different vampire bloodlines by subtle markers humans usually missed. I absorbed everything like the graduate student I'd once been, filling new journals with observations that now included the truth beneath surface appearances. The supernatural world had always existed alongside the mundane. I just finally learned to see it. But it was the quiet moments I treasured most. Late nights in the bookstore when Theron would pull some medieval manuscript and read passages aloud in their original language, then translate not just the words but the cultural context I'd never find in textbooks. Teaching me to see books not just as objects but as voices speaking across centuries, preserved by people like him who refused to let knowledge die. You're a bridge, I told him once. Between all the human lives you've witnessed and the future they'll never see. That's not monstrous. That's sacred. Or it was just survival masquerading as purpose. It can be both. 6 weeks after the court session, I sat at my desk in the Slavic literature section during a quiet Tuesday night, my journal open to a fresh page. The leather was familiar beneath my fingers, this 5th volume in a series that now documented 2 different worlds. I wrote, Tuesday 1:47 a.m. TV arrives exactly on schedule as always. But tonight when he finds me writing, he doesn't just straighten his cuffs and disappear into the stacks. He pulls up the chair across from mine and asks what I'm documenting. Your history, I tell him. 800 years of survival. You asked me to write it, remember? In the library after the court. He did ask, though I don't think he expected me to actually do it. To take his scattered memories, stories shared during late-night conversations, observations about how the world has changed, admissions about people he's loved and lost, and weave them into narrative, into preservation. The worst part of immortality is forgetting faces of those you loved, he said once. I told him that's why we preserve memory in ink and paper. Why we build libraries and archives and bookstores that outlast their creators. Memory made permanent through human effort. Tonight he reads what I've written so far. 3 journals full of his history, starting with 1188 in a Romanian village I can barely pronounce. His hands shake slightly as he turns pages, seeing his own life reflected through my observations. Through mortal eyes that will age and fail while he endures. Thank you, he says finally. For making me permanent in ways I thought I'd lost. Maybe that's what love is, I tell him. Making each other permanent. He'll remember my face long after I'm gone, carry me forward into centuries I'll never see. And I'll have written him into eternity, preserved his humanity in mortal words that might outlast even vampire memory. We're neither of us the last of anything anymore. We're the first of something new, a partnership built across the divide between mortal and immortal, between human observation and supernatural experience. Between loneliness and belonging. The court watches. Cashin is exiled. The other archaic families remain hidden and safe. And I sit in a bookstore that's stood since before America was a country, writing in a journal that's become a bridge between worlds. I used to document observations from careful distance, too afraid of connection to risk participation. Now I'm learning that the only way to truly see is to be willing to be seen in return. To let someone past every defense. To choose vulnerability even when, especially when, it terrifies you. The last line I wrote before everything changed was, he knows what it means to be the last of something precious. I was right, but I was also wrong. Because now we're learning what it means to be first together. I set down my pen as Theron appeared beside my desk carrying 2 cups of tea, Black Russian Caravan for me. Something herbal I'd never seen him actually drink for himself. The gesture of normalcy, of domesticity, in a life that had become anything but. Still writing. He set the cups down carefully, steam rising in the lamplight. Always. I closed the journal but left my hand resting on its cover. Someone has to document this. For when you forget, or when I'm gone, or for whoever comes after us trying to understand how a Russian graduate student and an 800-year-old vampire built something neither of them expected. A very stubborn Russian graduate student. His smile was slight but genuine. Who argues with me constantly and questions every assumption I've made in 8 centuries. Someone needs to. Yes. He sat in the chair across from mine, in the quiet bookstore surrounded by centuries of accumulated wisdom and preservation. Someone does. We sat together in companionable silence, drinking tea while Boston slept around us, no longer lonely, no longer hiding. The last line of my journal had become the first line of our shared story, written in ink and time and the courage required to choose connection despite every reason to remain apart. Outside, dawn approached. But here in Vorencis' rare books, among volumes that remembered ages we'd never see and voices that spoke across death itself, we built something new from old materials. A bridge between worlds. A way of being permanent. A belonging we'd both been searching for, finally found in the most unlikely place, between the pages of a journal that had seen too much, preserved by a vampire who'd survived too long, written by a woman who'd finally stopped running from the only thing worth the risk. Love. In all its terrifying, beautiful impermanence.